Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Today, we're going to talk about figures, figurines, and models, and gravity and physics, and why I think some artists don't quite grasp the concept of gravity. This is no slight against any one particular creator, but I'll probably be showing a few examples from artists that y'all maybe know, and I'm not even going to mention who they are because if you know them, great. If you don't, you don't. I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just making a point of some of these things, and maybe if I point this out, just maybe, someone will take the hint. Now, we've all seen models that, are in cool action poses, whether they be running, or ducking, crawling, fighting, slashing a sword, however, whatever the action pose is. And the cooler the pose often makes it more enticing. Looks cool. You want that actiony kind of thing going on. Sometimes these poses compromise control. And what I mean by that is essentially these models, they still have to work in the real world. They still have to have real world physics. And so when you have a model that's standing up for 24 hours a day under its own weight and pressure, and the only thing holding it is one key that's attached to one part of that model that's attached to the base. I don't care how heavy that base is or how weighted it is or how good your glue is. Eventually, it's going to give because gravity will always win in the end, and eventually the weight of that top object will win and overpower the glue. The glue will eventually give up, and or the plastic will give up, or the resin will crack. I've had this happen. I've seen it happen on models. We've traveled to shows with particular ones that I knew were going to be problematic. We'd get to the show and absolutely was broken in the box. And again, this is only because of the fragility of how they're placed. There's one point of contact, and it's usually a very large object. And I'm going to show you in Lychee some of the examples that I picked out, and I'm going to give you reasons when you can do this, or I guess when this is acceptable, because obviously weight doesn't matter so much, and when it's really just not acceptable to do this. And don't get me wrong, I love the models that I'm going to show y'all because they're fun, and I've only picked a few examples here, but I just had to talk about this. Something that's bothered me for a long time. I've even had customers ask me about this when a particular piece like they've had or something for a year, it'll just break, and then I'll say, "Did it fall?" No, it just kind of broke off the thing. Again, there are ways you can strengthen it. You can use rods. You can put a post in it. Usually, what will happen is it'll break right above the post. In some cases, depending on how deep you can get that post to go. So there's ways to get around it. There's ways to fix it. You could always attach another piece to the other part of the model. That you have options, but it always requires some level of modification, which I just have to ask it's not necessary. All they have to do in most cases is simply put some sort of an object for either the other leg to lean on or just support it in some other way. Either part of the base has a piece that's just jutted out, so that way their foot is touching it. Anyway, like I said, I'm going to give you a couple examples, and then I'm going to show you one or two examples, maybe one example, a good example of how it could be done maybe better. So we'll get into it. All right. Here we are in Lychee Slicer, as usual, my native habitat. And yes, this is Rouge the Bat. In case anyone doesn't know, it's from Sonic the Hedgehog. I'm not going to give you any more details. Anyway, beautiful model, gorgeous, wonderful details. But then you get down here. And this is what I'm talking about, folks. This right here. Now, this model actually, thankfully, has 2 points of contact down here at the bottom. It has a heel and a toe. But I'm also going to point out another fact. This base most commonly will be hollowed. It's going to be very top heavy because of its height. This base is not conducive of a tall object. It's going to tip over, or it's going to have tipping issues where it's just going to be prone to tipping over. The other thing that's going to happen is over time, this eventually is going to get weaker and weaker and it's going to snap off at the foot. Either at the foot or right at the key or right above the foot or at the ankle. This is where all the pressure is going to be, right here. All the pressure and gravity and all the forces of our Mother Nature and planet Earth are going to be pulling right here at this little ankle. And that's it. That's all you have keeping this model up. This is what I'm talking about, folks. Let's take a look at another one. And yes, I put this one together in pieces intentionally. Now, this is an interesting one because I've done this. I built this for folks. This top sheet is solid, so that's going to be heavy. This part's hollow, the legs are solid, and the base is solid. The base is like a hockey puck. You could probably kill someone with that thing. No, it's very heavy. Anyway, the point is that the parts here on the bottom are going to be heavier because I'm trying to keep it down. However, this suffers from a similar issue where the toe and heel are the only things keeping it afloat. So at the end of the day, it's literally held up by that key and that key. That entire model, all of it, all of this held up by that. I know what you're going to say. Oh, the base, the hockey puck you were talking about, that thing, right? Yeah, I mean it's going to help, but it's also so small that it's not going to offer that much. Sure, being solid, it's going to keep that part of it on the ground. Probably going to help you from tipping. The problem I have with it is this: it's this one-legged, propped up position thing. It's horrible. All you had to do is take this leg and touch the ground. Didn't have to be bent up like that. I mean, who scares somebody like that? Silly. Love the model. Absolutely. This is what I'm talking about. This is gravity and physics when it comes to models. And this one is not paying attention. Now, I've seen dozens, if not hundreds, of examples of these. I can't even talk about all of them. There are so many of them. But we'll bring up some more. And this next one is kind of going to be an example of when you might be able to get away with it, but only in very, very, very extreme circumstances. So these are all different scales, obviously. We've got our 75 millimeter, a little bit smaller than 75, it's like a 50, a little bit smaller than that, and then your 25. Now, this one, reason I wanted to use this one, I was almost using it as a thumbnail, but I decided this was actually better as a demonstration because of the fact, and I wish I was joking, it's literally held by a toe, and actually she's not touching that right now, but um, let me move her down just a bit. There. She is resting one foot, leaning forward, and mind you, these do come pre-supported. I don't think the torso has been hollowed, so this is going to be decently heavy. It's not going to be like, oh, it's so heavy. It's going to weigh 100 grams or more. Then you got these little skinny legs, and only one of them's actually touching the floor. Now, at this size, I'm going to say absolutely not. And any bigger than that, I would say no. I don't even think glue is going to help you keep this model on this base. You would definitely have to put some sort of an armature, some sort of a rod or beam or something, a post would have to go into this person's leg. You'd have to drill a hole into the leg and you'd have to put a post into that character's leg. That is the only, and even then, I think you still might suffer issues where eventually it's going to snap. Because I had a figurine very similar to this where I made ages ago, years ago, and I remember I had finished it. It was sitting on my shelf, and one day I just came in the studio and it was just sitting on the floor. It had just fallen off. It snapped right at the ankle. Very similar thing where it was kind of leaning forward. Had a very had a decently sized. I didn't believe it was about this size. Decently sized upper torso. Just it was just leaning forward too long, and eventually this weight is just gonna snap that little tiny leg. Now, when I think you can get away with it, I think you can get away with it here. These two sizes. I think you'd be fine here because I think this is so small and this is so small that this is going to be so light. It's not even going to weigh 20 grams or even that much. And so I think you could get away with it here in this sense. But I think any larger, no. Maybe in one piece like this, you might be able to get away with it. And again, you're going to have to do some sort of posting or armature or something back here to figure out some way of securing her to that base a little bit better than the way she is right now. Because just some glue on her foot, hate to say this, guys. Physics is literally telling you she's going to fall forward. She's running forward. I mean, it's almost just imagine she's going to trip because that's what's going to happen. She's eventually going to trip. Now, I promised you guys that I would show you a model because I'm not trying to beat up people here that did it right. And yeah, maybe I'm biased because I work with these models. But let's take a look at this one. Now, this is Jessica Rabbit, duh. And see, she's on one foot, right? But what did we do here to compensate? We've introduced a stool. And the stool cuts directly into where the leg sits. And it sits right in front of the key. Now you can finagle the position a little bit once you build it. But it will sit within the parameters of the base. And she can then lean on it, putting pressure here on the top of the stool. And then that pressure will then apply to these 4 points, which are then connected to the base. And even though there's no key hole specifically down here for the stool, that is going to disperse the pressure and the stress from just this leg to now both sides of the model. It's going to make it stand better, it's going to be more stable, and it's going to have better gravity control for the long term. And so that, in all essence, is really the right way to do a one-legged stand, if so you will. Another way you can do it is you could have the character leaning on something, backwards almost, have the foot leaning on something. Like if they're running, maybe put like a rock or something behind one of the feet, so that way there's a contact point. Just all I'm saying is that I think every model should at least have 2 solid contact points on its base. I think if you don't do that, you're just asking for gravity to eventually just pull it down to the floor. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants to throw their models away especially after they worked on them. So I mean, just a consideration. And for those artists out there creating models, keep doing all the wonderful work you do. This is not me picking on you guys. I'm a modeler. It's frustrating sometimes when we make things and then gravity destroys our work because, well, it just decided that this is how it stands this way, and physics is saying, no, I don't want to stand like this. And unfortunately, gravity wins, and it will pull it to the floor. So again, not picking on any one particular artist. I've seen this all over the place. So many artists have been guilty of this kind of thing. And it's not a slight to anybody because honestly, it's a cool thing. I get it. It's the action pose, the running thing, the jumping, the whatever. It's cool. I get it. But when you're building models, we need to think of real world physics. So just keep that in mind the next time you sit down and start creating your next model kit. Is it going to actually work? Or do you need to create some sort of support system to make sure that it's not going to fail later on? These are things that I didn't think of when I started doing modeling back when I was a kid, and certainly stuff I still didn't think of when I got back into it again as an adult. But it's things I think of now as I do this professionally for people and as we make models professionally for folks. It is definitely something that I have to think of. And so I decided this was a good topic for us to talk about. And I hope y'all got something out of this episode too. See you guys again real soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.